My name is Frank Callahan. I am 64 years old, and I just came home from burying my wife of 38 years. The casseroles started arriving before the dirt had even settled over Carol's grave. Neighbors, church ladies, a cousin from Ohio I hadn't spoken to since the Clinton administration. They filed through our front door with foil-covered dishes and sad eyes, and I stood in the hallway of the house I'd wired myself back in 1989, shaking hands and saying, "Thank you" so many times the words stopped meaning anything. My daughter Lauren stood beside me the whole time, her hand on my elbow, steering me from guest to guest like I was a child at his first funeral. Her husband Derek stood near the kitchen doorway, refilling his own drink more than anyone else's, smiling that big, easy smile he'd had since the day she brought him home 15 years ago. The smile that had always looked just a little too practiced to me. The smile of a man running for something. I noticed things about people. Always had. 38 years as a licensed electrician, you learn to read what's hidden inside walls. You learn that what looks clean on the surface is sometimes a mess of faulty connections underneath. You learn to trust what you see with your own eyes before you trust what anyone tells you. What I saw that afternoon was my daughter and her husband exchanging looks over the heads of the mourners. Not grief looks, not the silent, tired language of two people sharing the weight of a loss together. These were something else. Quick, purposeful. The look of two people who have already had the conversation they're pretending not to have had. The last guest left around 7. Lauren hugged me at the door, holding on a beat too long, the way people do when they feel guilty about something. Derek gripped my hand and said, "We're going to get through this together, Frank," which struck me as a strange thing to say. Together implied a shared problem. Carol's death wasn't their problem. She was my wife. They left. The house went quiet. I sat in the kitchen, at the table Carol had chosen from a catalog in 1997, and I tried to remember the last normal morning we'd had together. I couldn't. The last 8 months had blurred into a fog of doctor's appointments and specialist visits and symptoms that nobody could quite explain. Fatigue so severe she could barely climb the stairs. Nausea. Trembling hands. Hair thinning at the temples. Her doctor, a pleasant young man named Dr. Phillips, who had taken over the practice when old Dr. Rowan retired, kept running tests and shaking his head and saying words like idiopathic and stress-related and age-appropriate decline. Carol was 61 years old. She had run a half marathon at 58. 6 months before she died, she had looked at me from the hospital bed, where they were doing yet another round of blood work, and she said something I had filed away as the grief talking of a frightened woman. "Frank," she said, her voice thin, "I don't feel sick. I feel like something is being done to me." I had taken her hand. I had said, "I know, sweetheart. I know it feels that way." I had been wrong to dismiss it. I knew that now, sitting in the kitchen at 7:30 on the night of her funeral. I knew it the way, you know, when a circuit is live before you ever touch it. Something in the air. Something in the way the hair stands up on the back of your neck. My phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. Area code I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I had 100 messages I hadn't answered, but something made me pick it up. "Frank Callahan?" The voice was measured, professional. A man's voice, older, with a faint accent I couldn't place. "Speaking. My name is Victor Marsh. I was Carol's attorney." I sat up straighter. Carol had a personal attorney? She'd never mentioned a Victor Marsh to me. We used the same family lawyer for our will, a woman named Patricia Holt who'd drawn up our estate documents years ago. Carol had no reason for a separate attorney. "Unless, I don't believe she ever told you about me," Victor Marsh said, as if reading my silence. "She specifically asked me not to contact you unless certain conditions were met. Mr. Callahan, I'm sorry to call on this day, of all days. I wouldn't, except that time matters here." "What conditions?" I asked. "Her death," he said simply. "She left instructions. She told me that if she died before resolving a situation she was very concerned about, I was to call you immediately. She told me not to wait." He paused. "She also told me something else." I waited. "She told me not to call if your daughter or her husband were present when you answered." The kitchen felt suddenly very small. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the empty driveway to make sure Lauren and Derek's car was truly gone. "They just left," I said. "Good. Then listen to me carefully, Frank. Don't tell them about this call. Don't mention my name. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? Early. I'm in Millbrook, off Route 9. I'll text you the address." "Carol's been in the ground 6 hours," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "I know, and I am genuinely sorry for that. But Carol spent the last 3 months of her life trying to protect you from something, and what she put in motion cannot wait." His voice dropped. "Mr. Callahan, based on what she told me and what I've been holding in my care, you need to understand that you may be in a great deal of danger. Not tomorrow. Now." The call ended. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, looking at Carol's reading glasses on the counter. She'd left them there 3 weeks ago, the last day she'd been well enough to sit at the kitchen table with her puzzle books. I hadn't moved them. I hadn't moved anything of hers. I thought about the 8 months of illness. I thought about the doctors who couldn't explain it. I thought about Derek's refilled drinks and Lauren's steering hand and the looks they exchanged with the casseroles. I thought about Carol saying, "I feel like something is being done to me." I didn't sleep. At 5 in the morning, before the sun was fully up, I drove to Millbrook. Victor Marsh's office was on the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian on a quiet side street, the kind of building that had been a dentist's office or an insurance company for decades before someone put frosted glass on the door and a brass nameplate in the hall. He was waiting for me. He was 70, maybe older, with the careful stillness of a man who had heard terrible things in professional confidence for many years and had learned not to let them move across his face. He shook my hand. He poured me coffee without asking. He sat across from me and folded his hands on the desk. "Carol came to see me 9 months ago," he said. "She found me through a referral from a colleague. She specifically wanted an attorney with no connection to anyone she knew. She told me she needed someone who could hold information confidentially and release it under very specific circumstances." "What information?" He opened a desk drawer and placed 2 things on the surface between us. A sealed envelope with my name on it in Carol's handwriting, and a small silver USB drive. "She left you a letter, and she left a video message on that drive." He looked at me steadily. "She also left me a detailed written account of everything she discovered, which I've already shared with someone else you'll need to meet." He glanced at the door to the inner office. "He's waiting in there." "Who is?" "His name is Paul Greer. He's a financial investigator. Carol hired him 6 months ago. Frank, I want to prepare you before you meet him, because what he found is..." He stopped, started again. "Carol was a very smart woman. You know that. She was meticulous. She was not paranoid, and she was not confused by her illness. What she suspected and what Mr. Greer confirmed are things that are going to be very hard to hear on this particular morning." "Tell me," I said. He did. Carol had been the bookkeeper for a small commercial property management company for 22 years. Small operation, but steady. She knew numbers the way I knew wire gauges. She could find an error in a spreadsheet the way I could find a short in a circuit by instinct, by the feeling that something didn't add up before she could even articulate why. 8 months ago, she had been helping Derek apply for a business loan. He'd asked her to review some financial statements for a new venture he was launching. A sports bar franchise he claimed had been approved for a location downtown. Carol had looked at the statements, and she had found something wrong. "What did she find?" I asked, though I already felt the answer moving toward me like a vehicle without brakes. Victor Marsh opened a folder. "Derek has been using your joint assets as collateral on loans for 4 years. Not the house, not your savings account, your pension." I stared at him. "He has your power of attorney on file with 3 separate lending institutions, Frank. Documents you signed during Carol's first hospitalization. She found copies in his home office when she was looking for the loan paperwork he'd asked her to review. She recognized your signature. I had signed things in the hospital, insurance documents, treatment consents, billing authorizations. Lauren had handed me papers with yellow sticky tabs and said, 'Dad, I just need you to sign these so we can get Mom's insurance to cover the procedure.' I had signed them. I was frightened and exhausted, and my wife was unconscious in the next room. How much? I said. Between the three institutions, he's borrowed against your pension fund to the tune of $460,000, Victor Marsh said, most of which has already been spent. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the arm of the chair. Carol confronted him? I asked. She tried to. She came to me first, to understand what she was looking at legally. Then she confronted Lauren. He paused. That was in early November. 2 weeks after that confrontation, her health began its final and most severe decline. I said nothing. The silence in the room was total. Paul Greer is going to walk you through the rest, Victor said. I want you to hear it from him, because he has the documentation, and he can explain what it means, in terms you'll need to understand for what comes next. He looked at me the way the best electricians look at a panel that's been burned from the inside. Professional, careful, entirely certain of what they're seeing. Frank, I need to ask you something first. In the last few months, while Carol was ill, who was preparing your meals? Who was in your house regularly? I thought of Lauren. 3 nights a week, minimum, sometimes more. Derek, less often, but there. Lauren, who had insisted on cooking because she was worried about her father eating properly. Lauren, who had taken over the grocery shopping because it was too much for Frank while he was running back and forth to the hospital. Lauren, who had said, Dad, at least let me do this one thing. At least let me take care of you while you're taking care of Mom. I thought about the fatigue I'd been feeling for months. I'd blamed it on the stress, the sleepless nights, the grief that had arrived before Carol even died, the anticipatory kind that hollows you out while the person you love is still breathing. My daughter, I said. Lauren cooked most nights. Victor Marsh nodded slowly. He wasn't surprised. That was the most frightening thing about his expression. He wasn't surprised at all. Paul Greer was nothing like I expected. He was compact, mid-50s, wearing a jacket that had seen better years and carrying a battered aluminum briefcase that he opened on the conference table like a man who had done this exact thing hundreds of times and had stopped finding any ceremony in it. He shook my hand. He sat down. He looked at me with dark, level eyes and said, I'm sorry about your wife, Mr. Callahan. She was a formidable woman. I want you to know that everything she asked me to do, she did for you. He opened his briefcase. He turned his laptop toward me. Carol contacted me in late November after meeting with Mr. Marsh. She told me she believed Derek had been systematically stealing from your retirement assets. What she didn't know yet was the full scope of it. I spent 6 weeks pulling thread. He pulled up a spreadsheet. Here's the picture. Derek's sports bar had never been approved for a location. There was no franchise. What there was, Paul Greer explained in the flat, careful voice of a man reciting facts, was a gambling problem that had started as a habit and become a catastrophe. Online betting, primarily. Sports and poker. Over 4 years, Derek had lost nearly $800,000. He had covered the losses by borrowing first against Lauren's income, then against a small inheritance she'd received from her grandmother. Then, when those were gone, against my pension using the documents he'd gotten me to sign in the hospital hallway. He still owes approximately $320,000 to creditors, Paul said. 2 of them are not the kind of creditors who send polite letters. I thought about Lauren, my daughter, the little girl who used to bring me coffee in the garage when I was working late, who had cried at her prom because the shoes she'd ordered arrived in the wrong color, and I'd stayed up until midnight, spray painting another pair to match her dress. The young woman who had stood at the altar and cried when I walked her down the aisle. Real tears. I had been certain they were real. She knows? I asked. Paul Greer's expression gave me the answer before his words did. We believe she's known for at least 2 years. The borrowing against your pension that required someone to present the documents in person at 2 of those institutions. The signature on the in-person authorization forms is a woman's. Lauren, Mr. Callahan, Paul said, I need to show you something else now. This is the part Carol specifically asked me to go through with you in person, because she knew it would be the hardest. He pulled up a second screen. Medical records, lab results. I recognized the format. I'd seen enough of them in the past 8 months. Carol requested a full toxicology panel in December, he said. She told her doctor it was for a study she'd read about related to her symptoms. The results came back and were flagged by Dr. Phillips as consistent with long-term, low-dose exposure to thallium. It's a heavy metal. It was used as a rat poison for decades before it was restricted. It causes exactly the symptoms Carol had: fatigue, hair loss, nerve damage, progressive organ failure. I heard my own heartbeat very clearly. Dr. Phillips told her it was possibly environmental, old pipes, sometimes, in older homes. He didn't pursue it further. Paul's voice stayed flat and professional. Carol did not believe it was environmental. She believed it was in something she was consuming regularly at home. She went back through everything she could think of. He paused. Mr. Callahan, Carol had a ritual. Every night before bed, she drank a cup of herbal tea, chamomile and lavender. She bought it in loose leaf from a shop in town. She kept the tin in the kitchen cabinet. I knew the tin, blue, with a painted flower on the lid. I had bought it for her birthday 2 years ago because she'd mentioned she had trouble sleeping. She stopped drinking the tea in December, Paul said. Her symptoms stabilized slightly within 2 weeks, not improved, but the rate of deterioration slowed. He looked at me. She didn't tell Dr. Phillips. She was afraid. She came back to Mr. Marsh instead, and she came back to me. Because she knew who was putting it in the tin, I said. She suspected. Yes. Paul closed the medical tab and opened another file. She set up a small camera in the kitchen. Motion activated, disguised as a cookbook stand she bought online. She ran it for 3 weeks. He looked at me steadily. Do you want to see this, Mr. Callahan? I need you to tell me you want to see it before I play it. Show me, I said. It was Lauren. The timestamp was a Tuesday morning in January, 6 weeks before Carol died. The kitchen was empty. The camera was angled toward the counter, and the image was clear enough, the resolution good enough, that there was no mistaking the face. Lauren came in from the back door with a grocery bag. She set it on the counter. She looked down the hallway. She was making sure she was alone. Then she reached into the grocery bag and took out a small, amber glass jar. She carried it to the cabinet where Carol kept the tea tin. She opened the tin. She unscrewed the jar's cap. She tilted it over the loose-leaf tea, tapping the bottom 3 times with the flat of her palm. A faint powder, barely visible, drifted down into the tin. She screwed the cap back on. She put the jar back in the bag. She closed the tin, put it back in the cabinet exactly as she'd found it, and went back to unloading the groceries like a woman putting away cereal and milk. My daughter who cried at her prom. I heard myself make a sound. I don't know exactly what kind of sound it was. It came from somewhere below language. Paul closed the laptop. He let me sit with it. He didn't offer platitudes or comfort. He was a man who dealt in facts, and he had the decency to let the facts land before he continued. After a while, I said, Was it in my food too? Carol thought so. She wasn't certain about the delivery method for you. What she was certain about was that your symptoms, the fatigue you mentioned to her, the joint pain you'd been dismissing as the job catching up with you, she documented all of it in her written account. She believed you were also being dosed. At a lower level, enough to make you seem older, slower, less sharp. He paused. Enough that, if you later claimed you'd been deceived, people would be more inclined to believe you were simply confused. I thought about the joint pain in my hands. I'd been attributing it to 38 years of electrical work. I thought about the mental fog on some mornings, the feeling of pushing through gauze, which I'd been blaming on grief and broken sleep. I thought about how, over the past 6 months, I had felt myself becoming less than I was, and how Lauren had been there, kind and concerned and present, nodding sympathetically when I said I was tired, telling me it was perfectly natural, telling me I needed to take better care of myself. What did she want me to do? I asked. Carol, what was the plan she left with you? Victor Marsh leaned forward. She wanted you to have the truth. She wanted you to have the documentation before you were asked to sign anything. He folded his hands. Frank, Lauren, and Derek are going to come to you with paperwork. They may have already mentioned it. They hadn't. But there had been something in the way Derek said we're going to get through this together that had felt like the edge of a conversation that hadn't started yet. What kind of paperwork? Paul Greer opened his briefcase again and placed a document on the table. A copy, not an original, but I could see the header clearly. It was a medical and financial power of attorney, comprehensive, granting Lauren and Derek joint authority over all my assets and medical decisions. Carol found a draft of this on Derek's computer 3 months ago, Paul said. She photographed it and sent the file to Mr. Marsh. He pointed to a section near the bottom. This part is what she was most frightened of. I read it. The language was dense, but I worked through it slowly. There was a section authorizing, upon the determination of a licensed physician, that the grantor exhibited cognitive decline consistent with dementia or related conditions, the immediate transfer of residential property to the appointed agents. The house. If I signed this, and if a doctor, any doctor they found, signed a form saying I was declining mentally, they could sell the house, and I couldn't contest it. There's more, Paul said. The financial advisor Derek has been using is not independent. He's a man named Stokes, who Derek has been working with on the fraudulent loan applications. He's already prepared the paperwork to liquidate your pension in full. Once authority is transferred, that money disappears into the debt, pays off the creditors, and leaves nothing. I looked at the window. The morning outside was ordinary. Someone was walking a dog past the Victorian. A delivery truck idled at the light. 38 years. Every early morning and every late night, every crawl space and every attic, and every breaker panel in every house and office building in this county where I'd left a piece of my knees and my back. All of it built for Carol and for Lauren. The house, the pension, the life. What happens to me? I asked. After they have authority and they've sold everything. Victor Marsh's expression did not change, and that told me everything. There was a memory care facility 40 minutes north of here. Clean, modern, well-reviewed. Lauren had mentioned it 3 times in the last month, always in a careful, gentle way, always as part of a conversation about how hard it must be for me to rattle around that big house alone, how nice it would be to have people around, professional people, people who could really look after me. I understood the plan now in its entirety. Poison me slowly to make me seem to be in cognitive decline. Get me to sign the power of attorney, probably soon, while I was still soft with grief and before I had time to consult anyone. Have their cooperative physician sign the cognitive decline paperwork. Move me to the facility. Sell the house. Liquidate the pension. Clear the debts. And Frank Callahan, the slow, sad, deteriorating old man who'd made a mistake with his finances and could no longer care for himself, would simply disappear into a memory care ward and be no further trouble to anyone. I had not been wrong to trust the feeling in the air. "Victor," I said, and I was surprised at how steady my own voice was. What did Carol want me to do with all of this? He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was Carol's handwriting, neat and precise even when her hands were trembling, the way it always had been at the margins of recipes and birthday cards, and the notes she'd leave me when she left for work before I woke up. It said, "Trust Paul. Trust Victor. Trust yourself, Frank. You are not old. You are not slow. Don't let them tell you that you are. Whatever they ask you to sign, don't sign it. Go to the police with Victor. But first, there's one more thing you need to see. Watch the video." I picked up the USB drive. The video was 4 minutes and 32 seconds long. Carol had filmed it on her phone, sitting in her car in a parking garage, somewhere I didn't recognize. She was thin in a way that still shocked me, even though I had watched it happen. But her eyes were the same, sharp and clear, and entirely, completely her. She looked directly at the camera, and she said, "Frank, if you're watching this, then Victor called you, and you're sitting in his office, and you know most of it by now. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I was afraid. I was afraid you wouldn't believe me, and I was afraid that if you confronted Lauren, it would accelerate things before I had enough to prove it. I needed proof first. That's who I am. You know that." She smiled a little. Even thin, even sick, that smile was Carol. "I want you to know that I tried everything I could think of. I stopped drinking the tea. I told Dr. Phillips I thought there was something environmental and he ran the talk screen. I got Paul working on Derek's finances. I built the case the best I could. I'm sorry it wasn't faster. I'm sorry I'm not there to see what you do with it. She looked down at her hands for a moment, then back up. Go to the police with Victor. Don't do anything dramatic. Don't confront Lauren alone. Let Paul and Victor handle the legal side. You just need to do one thing for me, Frank. You need to be the man I married. The one who looks at something broken and figures out how to fix it. That's all I'm asking. She reached forward and stopped the recording. I sat in Victor Marsh's office for a long time after that. Paul Greer arranged 2 glasses of water and left them on the table without comment. Victor sat across from me with the patience of a man who had given people terrible news for 50 years and had learned that silence was often more useful than anything he could say. When do they come to me with the paperwork? I asked finally. Based on the pattern Carol anticipated, they'll wait 2 or 3 days. They'll want you to be at your lowest before they ask. Paul's voice was measured. They're counting on your grief. They're counting on the fact that you'll want to trust your daughter. They're counting on being the only family you have left. What do the police need? I asked. It wasn't enough on its own, Paul explained. The video was powerful, but a good defense attorney would argue the jar contained a vitamin supplement. The financial documentation was solid but circumstantial. Derek could claim it was a misunderstanding about the loan authorization. What they needed was the complete chain. They needed the jar. They needed the powder in the jar to match what was in Carol's blood. And they needed it seized cleanly, not in a way that could be argued as entrapment or evidence contamination, which meant they needed to catch it happening again. Not to Carol. Carol was beyond any of it now. To me, I understood what Paul wasn't saying. I had been in trades long enough to know that sometimes fixing a problem required putting your hand somewhere uncomfortable. You couldn't fix what you couldn't reach. And you couldn't reach it without accepting some risk. I have to go home, I said. I have to let them come to me. Paul nodded. We've already spoken with the detective assigned to the case. His name is Vasquez. He's seen the video and the financial records. He wants the physical evidence, the jar and its contents, tested alongside a beverage sample prepared in your presence. That's the clean chain. You want me to let my daughter poison me? We want you to let her try, Paul said. While every move is documented, witnessed, and ready for seizure the moment it happens. The detective has 2 officers who can be at your house in under 4 minutes. He held my gaze. You'd be wearing a recording device. I'd be listening from a car on your street. The moment there is any indication of real physical danger to you, we move immediately. This isn't about putting you at risk. This is about making sure they cannot walk out of a courtroom. I looked at Victor. She planned for this too. I said. Carol. She planned for this possibility. She did, Victor said quietly. She said you'd know what to do once you had the truth. She said you had never walked away from a problem in your life. I drove home. I changed my clothes. I called my neighbor Helen and asked if she could check on me in a few days. A perfectly normal request, the kind of thing grieving men ask of kind neighbors. Then I went to sleep in the chair in the living room because I couldn't go upstairs. Couldn't go near the bedroom. Not yet. Lauren came the next evening. She arrived with soup and bread from the Italian place I liked, and she had her careful face on, the one she wore when she was managing me, and she sat across from me in the living room and talked about her mother, with exactly the right amount of tears and exactly the right pauses, and I watched her perform grief the way I had watched her perform childhood and adolescence, always with one eye on how it was landing. I had known on some level for years that something was thin in Lauren. I had told myself it was just the way she was built, a little cool, a little self-contained. Carol had said it too. Once, late at night when we thought Lauren was asleep, she'd said, I love her completely, Frank. I just don't always know who she is. I had told Carol she was imagining things. Mothers worried too much. I had been wrong about that too. Dad, Lauren said, setting down her soup bowl. I don't want to bring this up too soon, but Derek and I have been thinking about your situation, and we want to make sure you're taken care of. That's kind of you, I said. We've been talking to a friend of ours, a financial planner, about how to simplify things for you now that she hesitated with exactly the right weight. Now that Mom is gone, the pension, the house, It's a lot to manage alone, and we want to take that burden off you. I'm not sure I need help managing, I said. Her expression flickered for just a fraction of a second, the way a loose connection flickers under load before it settles back. Of course not. We just thought it would be easier if we had the legal authority to handle things on your behalf when you're not up to it. It's just protective, Dad. It's just in case. She produced the folder 2 visits later. A Tuesday morning, overcast. The kind of cold November light that makes everything look like a photograph from another decade. She arrived with Derek this time, and the folder appeared on my kitchen table like a stage prop that had been waiting in the wings. I put on my reading glasses. I read every word. I let them watch me read. I let Derek explain the language with his patient, slightly condescending voice, the voice he used when he thought he was the smartest person in the room. I asked about the cognitive decline clause. Derek said it was just legal language, standard boilerplate, nothing to worry about. Lauren touched my hand and said it was just to make sure I was protected. Could I have a day to think about it? I asked. Of course, Lauren said. And the smile she gave me was the warmest thing she had produced all morning because she thought she had already won. Take all the time you need, Dad. Could you make me some tea before you go? I said. The chamomile. It's in the cabinet, you know where. It helps me sleep. The kitchen was 12 feet from where I was sitting. I couldn't see the cabinet from the living room, but there was a small round mirror Carol had hung at an angle near the hall that gave a partial reflection of the counter, the kind of mirror people hang to make a tight space feel larger. I watched the mirror. I watched my daughter open the cabinet. I watched her take down the tea tin. I watched her reach into her coat pocket. I looked away before she turned back around. She brought me the tea in Carol's blue mug with the white handle that she'd received as a gift from a student the year she retired from teaching Sunday school. She set it in front of me with a smile and said, "Drink it while it's hot, Dad. It'll do you good." "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. I did not drink it. 20 minutes later, when Lauren and Derek were in my driveway saying their goodbyes and Lauren was telling me she'd call in the morning, I excused myself for a moment. I went inside. I took the mug to the kitchen, carefully, the way you carry something that contains more danger than it looks like it should. I poured the tea into a clean, sealed container from Paul Greer's kit, which he had shown me how to use 3 days ago. I sealed it. I put it in my coat pocket. I came back to the door. I hugged my daughter. I told her I loved her. She said she loved me too. Her car turned off the block, and before the sound of its engine had fully faded, Detective Vasquez's black SUV pulled up in front of my house. The analysis came back in 48 hours. Thallium sulfate, the same compound that had been in Carol's blood, at a concentration consistent with chronic exposure, not an acute dose. The kind of dose that accumulates, that builds slowly, that takes months to tell the story of what it was doing to you. It was the same compound that Paul Greer's independent laboratory had identified in a sample from the original tea tin, which Carol had replaced with an identical tin in December, so that Lauren wouldn't notice the original was gone. It was the kind of evidence that a defense attorney could not argue away. The arrests happened on a Thursday morning. I was not there. Detective Vasquez had asked if I wanted to be present, and I had said no, because I knew that if I saw the handcuffs go on my daughter, I would not be able to maintain anything, and I needed to maintain something. I needed to maintain the part of me that still believed the world was mostly built on solid ground. Paul Greer called me at 9:15. "It's done," he said. I was sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee that I had made myself, from a fresh bag I had bought from a different store, watching the sparrows at the feeder Carol had hung from the maple tree the spring before last. Derek broke first, apparently. Within 6 hours of booking, he was talking to the prosecutors about the loan fraud, the gambling debts, the fake power of attorney he'd arranged during Carol's first hospitalization. He gave them everything in the hope of a reduced charge. The prosecutors took his testimony and charged him anyway. Lauren did not break. This, somehow, was worse. The prosecutors told Victor Marsh that she had sat through 11 hours of questioning with the same composed expression, the same careful face, answering questions in monosyllables or not at all, betraying nothing. I did not know whether to find this terrible or somehow consistent with the person she had always been. The trial was 6 months away. I did not spend them waiting. I had the house tested for additional environmental contamination. There was none. I hired a physician recommended by Victor Marsh to run a full panel on my own blood, and they found trace thallium consistent with months of low-level exposure, not enough to have caused permanent damage, but enough to explain a great deal of what I had attributed to getting older. The joint pain began to ease by February. The mental fog lifted. I started sleeping in the actual bedroom in March, and the first night I did, I lay in the dark for a long time, looking at the ceiling and talking to Carol, which I understood was something that only worked one way but did not feel entirely pointless. I also watched the video again, several times. She had known she was running out of time. She had known the illness was too far advanced and that the proof she was building might arrive too late to save her. She had built it anyway, carefully, piece by piece, because that was who Carol was. She made the system work. She found the people who knew more than she did, and she trusted them with the pieces she couldn't carry alone. And she left me a message in a parking garage in her own voice, telling me I was not old, I was not slow, and I knew what to do. I knew what to do. The courtroom on the first day of trial was full of strangers and journalists and people who had followed the story in the news and wanted to watch it resolve in person, the way people have always gathered around the places where human nature reveals itself most completely. I walked in with Victor Marsh on one side, and a feeling I could not have named exactly. Not hatred, not grief, something more like the state you enter when you're in the middle of a difficult job and there's no good moment to stop. Lauren was at the defense table. She looked up when I entered. She had the same face, the same composed, careful face. I searched it for something regret, perhaps, or some fracture in the surface, and found nothing that I could be certain of. She turned back to her attorney. The prosecution played the kitchen video. Carol's tea tin, Lauren's hand in her coat pocket, the amber jar, 3 taps. The woman in the jury box directly behind the foreman pressed her lips together hard and looked at her hands. I testified on the 3rd day. I answered every question as precisely as I knew how. When Lauren's attorney suggested that I had been confused by grief, that I had misinterpreted events, that the toxicology report was ambiguous and the video was inconclusive, I looked at the jury and I said what I knew to be true. I have been an electrician for 38 years, I said. I have crawled through more walls than I can count. I have found failures that other people missed because I was willing to look at what was actually there and not what I hoped was there. My wife was not failing. She was being failed, and I was not confused. I was being managed. I paused. There is a difference. The jury took less than a day. I did not go back to the courtroom for the verdict. Victor Marsh called me with the result. I was at the hardware store, buying wire connectors for a repair I'd been putting off in the workshop for 4 months. I stood between the shelving aisles with my phone to my ear and Victor's voice telling me, and the man in the orange apron restocking cable staples 3 feet away had no idea what had just happened in the world, which seemed right to me. I thanked Victor. I bought the connectors. I drove home. I went out to the workshop, which smelled of wood shavings and machine oil and the particular dust of 38 years of projects, and I fixed the thing that needed fixing. My hands were steady. The joint pain was mostly gone now. The fog was gone entirely. Later, I made dinner. I ate it alone at the table Carol had chosen from a catalog, the one we'd had delivered in the rain on a Saturday in 1997, when Lauren was 11 and had stood in the kitchen watching the delivery men carry it in, saying, "It's too big, Mom. It takes up the whole room." And Carol had said, "No, it doesn't. It fits exactly right. There's room for everyone." I stayed at that table for a long time, after dinner, in the quiet of the house. There is a thing about loss that no one tells you accurately, which is that grief is not simply the weight of the person who is gone. It is also the weight of every version of the world that went with them. Every future dinner, every ordinary morning, every assumption you made about the architecture of your own life. You lose all of that at once, and the absence of it doesn't get smaller. You just learn, gradually, to live in a house with a room you cannot enter. Carol had spent the last months of her life not raging at what was being done to her, not collapsing under the weight of betrayal. She had spent those months building something. She had built the case, brick by brick, in parking garages and attorneys' offices and doctors' waiting rooms. She had saved my life with the last of her energy and had found a way to reach me across the weeks after her death with her voice and her handwriting and her precise, methodical love. I think about that on the hard mornings. I think about what it takes to do something like that, to be that certain of someone, to bet everything on the idea that they will know what to do. She was right about me. That much, at least, I got to prove. If you've ever felt like the people around you were not who you believed them to be, I want you to know that your instincts are not nothing. The feeling in the air is not always wrong. Pay attention to it. Pay attention to the things that don't add up. And if you ever find yourself sitting in a room with the truth laid out in front of you, do what needs doing, even when every part of you wants to look away. Carol taught me that. She spent 38 years teaching me, and the last lesson was the hardest one. But I learned it. Leave me a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if this story stayed with you, please hit like and subscribe. There are more stories to tell.